The first barrage came without warning. Emerald streaks of energy rained from the heavens, carving fiery scars into Earth's surface. Major John Iron Carter, crouched in the smoldering ruins of what had once been a bustling city square, gritted his teeth as his helmet comms crackled with frantic voices. "They're everywhere, sir. Shields are impenetrable. Our rounds are useless." Carter pressed a gloved hand to his earpiece, his voice calm but firm. "Pull back to the rally point. We can't hold this position." Around him, his squad of soldiers scrambled for cover as alien drones buzzed overhead, their sleek silver forms raining plasma bolts with lethal precision. The aliens, known as the Altherai, moved with an unnerving grace. Their towering, sinewy frames were encased in shimmering energy fields that deflected bullets like raindrops on glass. They wielded weapons that hummed with deadly elegance, disintegrating anything caught in their path. Sergeant Mike "Tex" Rollins, a burly Texan with a penchant for sarcasm even in dire situations, ducked behind a crumbling pillar beside Carter. "This ain't a fight, Major. It's a slaughter." Carter didn't respond immediately. His steel-gray eyes scanned the battlefield, calculating. Civilians were scattered among the chaos, screaming as they fled. A young boy, no older than 10, tripped over debris and fell in the open. Without hesitation, Carter broke cover, sprinting through enemy fire. He scooped the child up and dashed back, rolling into safety as plasma bolts scorched the ground behind him. "Major's out here playing hero again," Tex muttered, shaking his head as he tossed a grenade into a cluster of advancing Altherai soldiers. The explosion scattered them, but the shimmering shields quickly reformed, and the aliens pressed forward with chilling determination. Carter handed the boy off to a medic and turned back to his men. "We're not heroes, Texas. We're survivors. Now move." By the time the remnants of Carter's unit reached the rally point, a partially collapsed overpass, the reality of their situation was sinking in. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed. Corporal Danny "Doc" Reeves, the squad's medic and makeshift engineer, crouched over a wounded soldier, his hand steady despite the tremor in his voice. "We got nothing that can touch their shields, Major. Even the heavy artillery barely slows them down." A deep, guttural laugh echoed through the comms. It belonged to one of the Altherai commanders, who had been broadcasting their disdain since the assault began. "Pitiful humans. Did you truly think your primitive weapons could challenge the might of the Empire?" Carter's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. The morale of his men was already hanging by a thread. Tex spat on the ground. "Cocky bastards, ain't they?" "They've earned it," Doc said bitterly, gesturing to the carnage around them. "We're throwing pebbles at tanks." The sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention. Specialist Brad "Ghost" Walker, the squad's stealth expert, emerged from the shadows, his face streaked with soot. "Scouted ahead," he said in his usual clipped tone. "They've set up a forward operating base 2 clicks north. Heavy patrols. We can't punch through?" Carter rubbed a hand over his stubbled jaw, thinking. Retreating wasn't an option, not with so many civilians still unaccounted for. But fighting a conventional battle was suicide. They needed another way. That's when Tex, rummaging through the rubble for salvageable equipment, let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned." The others turned to see him kneeling beside a large metal crate, its surface marked with faded military insignias. Carter approached, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" Tex pried the crate open, revealing an assortment of rusted weapons and ammunition. He pulled out a battered rocket launcher, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Looks like somebody forgot to clean out their Cold War stockpile." Doc peered over his shoulder, skeptical. "You think a museum piece is going to help us now?" Tex hefted the launcher, testing its weight. "Better than throwing rocks." Carter took the weapon, examining it closely. His mind worked quickly, weighing possibilities. If we can modify the warheads, maybe add a shaped charge to focus the explosion. "Using what?" Doc asked, incredulous. "Whatever we can scavenge," Carter said firmly. "We don't need to beat them outright. Just enough to punch a hole." Ghost, who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say, nodded once. "Worth a shot." The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Doc and Tex worked together, stripping parts from disabled drones and damaged vehicles. Ghost kept watch, ensuring their makeshift lab wasn't discovered. Carter coordinated, his steady leadership holding the group together even as exhaustion set in. When the first modified rocket was finally ready, Tex gave it an appreciative pat. Let's see how these smug aliens like a taste of good American ingenuity. The opportunity came sooner than expected. An Althari patrol, 5 soldiers strong, passed within range of their position. Carter steadied the launcher on his shoulder, his finger hovering over the trigger. The alien shields shimmered in the dim light, a visual reminder of their perceived invincibility. "Here goes nothing," Carter muttered, firing. The rocket streaked through the air, trailing smoke. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the warhead detonated against the lead alien's shield. The force of the explosion collapsed the field, and the soldier within was obliterated. The remaining Althari faltered, their confidence visibly shaken. Another rocket followed, and then another, each one finding its mark. Within moments, the patrol was no more. Silence fell over the battlefield. Tex let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. It actually worked." Doc grinned, his earlier skepticism replaced by a glimmer of hope. "Guess they're not so invincible after all." Carter lowered the launcher, his expression grim but resolute. "We've got a long way to go," he said, "but at least now we've got a fighting chance." For the first time since the invasion began, the tide had turned, however slightly, in humanity's favor. The Empire might have advanced technology and overwhelming numbers, but they didn't have what humanity did: the ability to adapt, to innovate, and to turn even the most desperate situations into opportunities. As the team regrouped, Carter allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The Althari wanted a fight, and now they were going to get one. The first snow of the season dusted the Colorado mountains as Carter crouched at the edge of a ridge, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Below, a sprawling alien convoy snaked through the valley, shimmering with energy fields. The hum of their engines blended with the whine of hovering drones patrolling the skies. The Althari were taking no chances. Their convoys were fortified, their movements methodical. But Carter knew the cost of caution. It made them predictable. "Ghost, you in position?" Carter muttered into his comm. Always came the reply, clipped and steady. The ridge concealed Tex and Doc. Hunched over the launcher they had nicknamed Boomstick, the heavily modified weapon gleamed faintly in the pale light, its reinforced barrel packed with scavenged alien tech. "Tex," Carter continued, "we got one shot to nail the transport." "You miss, we're smoked." Tex snorted, adjusting his aim. "Relax, Major. It's like riding a bike, except the bike explodes." Beside him, Doc was a picture of focus, calibrating the warhead with nimble fingers. "Transports carrying shield generators," he muttered. "One good hit, and their field grid goes dark." "And if we screw up?" Tex asked, smirking. "Then we die," Doc replied flatly. Carter's voice cut through the tension. "Targets acquired. Fire on my mark." The team held their breath as the convoy rumbled into the ambush zone. Carter's hand hovered over his comm, and then, with a single word, "Now," Tex pulled the trigger. The rocket roared from the launcher, streaking through the thin mountain air. It struck the lead transport with a blinding explosion, tearing through its shield and obliterating the vehicle in a fiery cascade. The convoy lurched to a halt as chaos erupted. From his perch, Ghost fired precision rounds at the Althari troops scrambling to respond. His shots were deliberate, each one finding a weak point in their armor. On the ridge, Tex and Doc loaded another rocket, the latter shouting coordinates as the Althari tried to regroup. A second transport exploded, followed by a third. The valley echoed with the thunder of detonations and the sharp crack of gunfire. But the Althari adapted quickly. Drones swarmed toward the ridge, their plasma turrets spitting bolts of energy. Carter barked orders, his voice cutting through the noise. "Tex, Doc, fall back. Ghost, cover their retreat." Tex grumbled but obeyed, slinging the launcher over his shoulder. Doc followed, clutching their remaining warheads, as they scrambled down the slope. Above them, Ghost's rifle barked, picking off drones with unerring precision. Carter's team regrouped at a concealed cave, their breaths fogging in the cold air. Outside, the Altherai scoured the valley, their movements agitated. That, Tex said, leaning against the cave wall, was beautiful. Doc shook his head, inspecting their remaining supplies. We're running low on charges. Can't keep this up much longer. Carter knelt by a crude map spread across the cave floor, his expression grim. We don't need to. Just long enough to make them bleed. Make them bleed! Ghost's voice was low, almost a whisper. They're already sending heavier patrols. They'll escalate again, and next time we won't get away clean. Carter met his gaze. That's why we adapt. Adaptation had become their mantra. Each skirmish yielded new knowledge, each victory a chance to repurpose alien technology for human ingenuity. Doc's workshop, tucked into the mountain base's depths, was littered with half-finished prototypes. Drones rewired to serve as scouts, plasma cores rigged to power improvised explosives, and the crown jewel, a magnetically enhanced launcher capable of punching through even the Altherai's heaviest armor. Their tactics evolved as well. They avoided direct confrontation, striking supply lines, sabotaging infrastructure, and exploiting the terrain. The mountains became their ally, their cover, their weapon. The Altherai, for all their technology, were ill-equipped for guerrilla warfare. Their reliance on centralized command and rigid strategies left them vulnerable to the unpredictable. And unpredictable was something humans did best. It wasn't without cost. Each raid carried its risks, and not all of Carter's men returned. They buried their fallen in the frozen earth, marking each grave with a simple stone. The weight of those losses pressed on Carter's shoulders, but he never let it show. To his men, he was unshakable, a beacon in the storm. One night, as they huddled around a fire, Tex broke the silence. You think they even get it? Why we're fighting? Doc looked up from the weapon he was tinkering with. To them, we're just obstacles. Obstinate primitives clinging to a planet they want. They don't understand us, Carter said, his voice quiet but firm. And that's their weakness. The next day proved him right. An Altherai strike force, bolstered by new drone models designed to counter human tactics, launched an assault on a suspected resistance hideout. But the hideout was a decoy. Carter's team was waiting in the cliffs above, their explosives rigged to collapse the pass. When the trap was sprung, the resulting avalanche buried the Altherai forces. Carter's men moved quickly, picking off the survivors and salvaging what they could. Among the wreckage, Doc found a prototype drone with advanced scanning capabilities. Think we can use this? Tex asked, eyeing the sleek device. Doc grinned, his tired eyes alight with excitement. Oh, we'll do more than use it. We'll make it ours. That night, Carter stood at the edge of the ridge, watching the stars. He thought of the Altherai commanders' mocking broadcasts, the sneering disdain for humanity's primitive ways. Yet here they were, surviving, adapting, striking back. Tex joined him, holding a cup of steaming coffee. They're scared, you know, he said. Carter raised an eyebrow. You can see it in how they're moving, how they're fighting. They came here thinking this was going to be easy. Now they're chasing ghosts? Carter allowed himself a faint smile. Good. Let's keep it that way. Below, the valley was silent. But Carter knew the war was far from over. Each day brought new challenges, new losses, but also new opportunities. The Altherai might have the edge in technology, but they lacked the one thing humanity had in abundance: the will to fight, to adapt, to endure. Carter turned away from the ridge, his voice carrying into the dark. We're just getting started. The air was heavy with tension as Carter stood before his men, the glow of the holographic map illuminating their weathered faces. Around them, the cavern echoed with the hum of salvaged Altherai tech and the distant rumble of enemy patrols. They had pushed the invaders to their limits, but now the Altherai were making their final move, and humanity's survival hung by a thread. Ghost pointed to the map, his voice sharp. They're amassing their forces here, on the plains outside Denver. Reports say they've deployed heavy walkers, orbital strike platforms, and enough troops to wipe us out 10 times over. Tex, leaning against a crate of munitions, let out a low whistle. Guess they're done playing around? They know we're the last real resistance, Doc added, adjusting his glasses as he studied the map. If they crush us here, it's game over. Carter's gaze swept over his team. They were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but their eyes burned with a fierce determination. Then we don't give them the chance. We've got one shot at this, and we're going to make it count. The plan was simple in theory, but staggeringly complex in execution. The Althari's reliance on centralized systems meant that if they could disable the command hub buried within the Walker Battalion, the rest of the forces would collapse into disarray. The challenge was getting close enough to deliver the payload. That's where Boomstick comes in, Carter said, nodding toward the launcher Tex, cradled like a prized possession. Over the past weeks, it had been outfitted with scavenged Althari components, turning it into a weapon capable of punching through even their most advanced shields. Doc spoke up, his tone cautious. The warhead's experimental. If it doesn't work, it'll work, Carter interrupted. His voice carried the quiet conviction of a man who had bet everything on impossible odds before and lived to tell the tale. The night before the assault, the team prepared in silence, each man lost in his thoughts. Tex polished the launcher, muttering to himself. Ghost sharpened his knife, his movements methodical. Doc checked and rechecked the detonator, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. Carter watched them from a distance, his heart heavy. He had led these men through hell and back, and tomorrow they would face the end, one way or another. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. They deserved a leader who believed in them, who believed in their cause, even if the odds were impossible. When dawn broke, the team moved out. The plains stretched before them, a bleak expanse of scorched earth and jagged debris. In the distance, the Althari forces loomed, a sea of shimmering shields, towering walkers, and the faint glint of drones circling like vultures. Carter's voice crackled over the comms. Stick to the plan. Ghost, take out the sentries. Tex and Doc, you're with me. We move fast and hit hard. The first phase went smoothly. Ghost, a shadow among shadows, slipped through the enemy perimeter, dispatching sentries with brutal efficiency. By the time the rest of the team advanced, the path was clear. They reached the edge of the Walker Battalion, the massive machines towering above them like metal giants. The command hub was embedded in the largest walker, a fortress on legs bristling with weaponry. Tex hefted the launcher, his expression grim. This thing better work, or we're going to be vaporized before we get close. It'll work, Carter said, his voice steady. It has to. The team moved under the cover of chaos. Doc had rigged a series of explosive distractions, drawing the Althari forces away from the walker's vulnerable underbelly. Plasma bolts streaked across the sky as drones buzzed overhead, their sensors searching for the source of the attack. They reached the base of the walker, its legs a maze of cables and armor plates. Tex positioned the launcher, his hands steady despite the tension radiating from him. Just like we practiced, Doc said, handing him the detonator. Tex exhaled slowly. Here goes nothing. He fired. The rocket streaked upward, its warhead glowing with a fierce blue light. It struck the walker's shield, and for a moment, it seemed to hold. Then the shield collapsed, and the explosion tore through the walker's command hub with a deafening roar. The massive machine shuddered, sparks cascading from its damaged systems. Around them, the Althari forces faltered, their movements disjointed as their centralized command fell into chaos. Carter didn't waste a second. Fall back! Now! They sprinted through the debris-strewn battlefield as the remaining walkers floundered, their weapons firing erratically. Ghost covered their retreat, his rifle barking as he picked off pursuing drones. By the time they reached the extraction point, the plains were a scene of utter devastation. The Althari forces were in disarray, their once-coordinated assault reduced to scattered skirmishes. Tex collapsed onto the ground, laughing breathlessly. I can't believe that worked. Doc sat beside him, his face pale but triumphant. We just turned their own tech against them. They won't recover from this. Ghost approached, his expression as unreadable as ever. They'll try, but not today. Carter stood at the edge of the extraction point, watching the remnants of the Althari forces retreat. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a small smile. They had done the impossible, striking a blow that would echo across the stars. But as he looked at his men, battered but unbroken, he knew the fight was far from over. The Altherai might regroup, might return with even greater force, but humanity had shown them something they couldn't ignore. They were survivors, innovators, fighters, and no matter how advanced the enemy, humanity would always find a way to rise. Carter turned to his team, his voice carrying over the wind. "Let's head home. We got a war to finish."